So we've excavated our site, we've prepped our rooting zone, we've got nice, tight, clean, straight edges. Now we're probably ready to start laying some grass. So there's an old joke in the industry that every time you lay sod, you always want to make sure that it's the green side up. And you'll probably hear that a few times from passerbys when you're doing your job. But it's a lot more complex than that. We want to make sure that we've excavated to the proper depth, that we've got staggered seams, we have no gaps, and that we've got nice tight edges when we're putting this down. So I'll show you where I'm going to start. And every time when you start sodding, you should always start on your closest edge. So I've just laid my very first piece of sod. It's one of the most important pieces in the process because that's what sets the tone for the rest of the job. Every other piece of sod that I lay on this project is going to be based off of the orientation of that first piece of sod. Now, if you look closely at what I've just put down, I know I've done a good job because the height of the sod I've put down is the same as the height of the surrounding workspace. So when people walk over it, they're not going to trip over an edge if it's too shallow, and it's not going to sit too proud or too high, which puts us at risk of drying out our root zone, and now we're chasing water again. You'll also notice that on this piece of sod, on the far edge, I have overlapped. So this is not a perfect 90-degree corner where the sod roll starts. And you'll see I've overlaid it. And I've done that on purpose because my focus right now is getting the sod laid. When I'm done all of that, then I'm going to come around and do all the polish work, which is all my edging, to make sure that it's nice and clean and it fits in there perfectly. So I want to take a few minutes to talk about the importance of having nice, tight seams on a sod job. Seams are what we use when we're describing when one piece of sod abuts to the next piece of sod or to the surrounding of the job site. So there's a long seam. In this case, we're talking about the seam abutting next to the edge that we've just prepped. We've got a seam here where one piece of sod on the same line abuts to the previous piece of sod. And then we have another longer seam where the next line of sod comes in and abuts to the previous line of sod. And when we're doing sod laying, we want to avoid any kind of gaps like this. Even small gaps that aren't even visible to the touch or to the eye are still there. And we want to avoid those as much as possible because a gap allows air to move in to dry out the sod, and that will be counterproductive to our goals. So tight seams always. Every time you lay a sod roll, you want to make sure it's nice and tight to the previous laid sod, and the next time you start a line, you want to make sure that it is nice and tight. And on occasion, when you're rolling out sod, especially because it's in a tight roll, you want to make sure that this seam is flat up against this seam. And sometimes that requires us to bend that sod a little bit and then slide it into place. And if we've done it correctly, we shouldn't see any seams at all. So one of the other things I want to talk about with reference to seams is the importance of offsetting them. And what I mean by that is here I've got two rolls of sod that have a seam in the center of them. When my next roll comes through, I want to make sure that the seam does not line up with the previous one. So they're offset by at least a couple inches So you can see I've done that here. In this roll, my seam is slightly ahead of the previous one. And the importance of that is when we line up our seams in the exact same spot, we're now introducing the opportunity for more oxygen to get in and dry it out, as well as we can have issues with water infiltrating and potentially eroding. So when we stagger seams, just like we stagger shingles on a roof, we don't want our seams to line up. So you can see I've got a pretty good start on this sod job. I've got 4 lines beginning at the far end of my work site, which is setting me up for success as I work my way down. I've got tight seams. I've got a nice smooth floor. And I want to talk about some of the polishing work back where my edges are that I've overhung on my irregular first edge. So I'm using my edging tool, and I've gone and I've stepped down that edge as much as I can so that I can see it visually, and that will help guide where I go with my edging tool. So we talked about having some fertilizer, starter fertilizer, one that's higher in phosphorus, and that's what's gonna help our rooting. There are 2 strategies that you could use. Some people will choose to apply the fertilizer to the base after they've smoothed it out and finished it, but before they roll the sod out. And the theory there is that we're making the nutrients available directly where the roots need them. Other people choose to just apply it after the job is done, and that's what I'm gonna do today. So when we're applying fertilizer, we always wanna make sure that we need it. It's advisable if you can do a soil test to prove that you actually need the nutrients that you're gonna be putting down. And I always advise to make sure that you're reading the bag manufacturer's label so that you know that you're applying it at the correct rate and not over applying, which could cause harm for the environment.